Thank you very much, Gerard, for that generous introduction. And I'd like to repeat again our thanks to His Excellency the Ambassador for Italy for this very generous act of bringing 13 Italians from all over the world to talk about such extraordinary specialist subjects. I'm going to talk about works of art that before this conference were considered canonical, but are now the minor arts, as we've redefined them. That is, those minor artists like Giorgione, Titian, Aretino, Machiavelli, etc., etc. As you will see from this short presentation, I've long been fascinated with Venetian painting, and this is to introduce a series of hypotheses about a phenomenon that interests me very much. The Conpagnie delle Calze sounds wonderful in Italian. When it's translated into English, it becomes the confraternities of the stocking, and or the men who wore stockings or something like that. And however dignified you try to make the translation, it never really works in English. But from 1480 to 1560, there were some 43 or 46 companies in Venice of young patrician noblemen who were sort of event managers of the most chic kind, for carnival, for banquets, for weddings in particular, weddings of the nobility. And the Venetian population in this period consisted of large families, and often it was only the eldest son who would marry. So there was this floating population of male bachelors who had to be entertained in one way or another. Now, each of these companies has, 30, 40 members, and there are 46 of them, and each of them employed an architect, an artist, and a poet. And they involved networking with significant Venetian patrician families. So in any history of patronage of Venice, this has never really been gone into or analyzed, and the literature is extremely short on this phenomenon. I've shown you a detail of one of those minor works of the Italian Renaissance, the Concert Champêtre in the Louvre, and at the center of this composition, I'm not quite used to this system, is a young man playing a lute, and right at the center of the composition is this stocking, which is divided into two colors. And one of the signs of the Conpagnie delle Calze were the stockings that they wore. The first great global account of fashion by a distant relative of Titian's, Cesare Vecellio, we're looking at a 19th century edition. I say this for my Italian colleagues, it just happens to be the one we have in the University of Melbourne Library, represents and shows the costumes of the Conpagnie. And one of them, this figure here, is taken directly from a painting by Carpaccio that I'll show you in a moment. And these other ones just represent, I don't know what the sources of these two pictures are, but almost all of Vecellio's costumes are taken from amazing paintings. He's already writing after the Council of Ten disbanded the Compagnia formally in 1560. Their activities were of such importance to the Venetian government that they were controlled by the highest organ of state, and they were often given to outrageous and extraordinary behavior. Italian cities, which we know and love a great deal, are full of these extraordinary piazzas, and none more so than Venice. These piazzas were formed early on, and they have a long, long history, and they are continually used for what we call the art of spectacle, the visual display, which is intimately related to the political thinking of Venetian government. Right throughout the city, in various places, you find this iconography of the Compagnie delle Calze. And this is true for one of the most extraordinary buildings in Venice. We now know it as the post office near Rialto, but it's the Fondaco dei Tedeschi. And it was frescoed on the facade by Giorgione and by Titian on the side narrow canal. And we have a good reproduction in a book by Zanetti, a hand-colored copy of one of these Compagnie delle Calze who languidly, they were languid, beautiful young men who sort of stood in a particularly significant place. We do know that the Fondaco, which was a sort of German city within Venice of merchants, we do know that the Fondaco was used for theatre. And a lot of the places that one of the things one sees coming through this short presentation I'm giving today is the development of tiered theatres. And Palladio seems to have been intimately involved, and one might even speculate that as a young architect he worked for these Compagnie in Vicenza because he seems so closely involved in the development of contemporary theatre. This is just to remind you where Giorgione's frescoes were on the Grand Canal. They were here. Fragments of them are in the Cardoro, and there's a very fine female nude that survives. They're only taken off the walls of the Fondaco in the 1970s, so they had continually decayed, of course. Of all the artists that I'm looking at, it is Carpaccio who is the best known for his representation of the Conpagnie delle Calze. This is, I'm going to go through a little bit, a cycle of paintings that will be known to everyone here. It's conspicuously displayed in the Academy galleries. And in it figures many representations of these of the Loredan family, and also of quite flamboyant members of the Conpagnie delle Calze. And here you can see that one of the gorgeous drawing by him that survives. You can see that he worked very hard on this figure, who is flamboyantly dressed. A lot of these compagni seem to have dyed blonde hair, and his back is conspicuously to the spectator. And right throughout these paintings, you'll see that the situation of the figures of the compagni are almost as though they are a viewer outside the painting, or some such thing. How do you construct the biographies of these people who must have had tremendous social importance? They were very interluxury in the way that we heard from Chiara Bus yesterday and June Deschino about how men delighted in luxury in the Italian Renaissance. Well, this is a portrait in Vienna that I'm very fond of. It's not much literature on it, of Ottaviano Grimani as the procurator of St. Mark's. And he has the impresa of the Sempiterni. He belonged to, this means in Italian, those who always wanted to be eternal. And the names, according to Sansovino, of these compagnie, and I've just chosen a few, the Pavoni, the Ortolani, the Zardinieri, the Immortali, the Perpetui, Eterni, Felici, Trionfanti, Sempiterni, Reali, Accesi. Allora, these are all names about, aspiration and achievement. Ottaviano was the grandson of a doge. He was, his uncle was Cardinal Domenico Grimani, whose palace in Venice is now the most recent museum. It's the Museum of Antiquities. So he's born into a very important patrician family in Venice. And right throughout his life, he's portrayed a great deal. There are portrait busts of him and that sort of thing. He is here portrayed not in the way that most Venetian noblemen are portrayed, that is in a particular shade of black, but he has this dramatic red-slashed undergarment. You heard a little bit about codpieces from Bob, and there's a sort of green area where there's a sort of, this is a very erotic and fascinating portrait of an important young man. Now, he's someone who seems to have the characteristic biography of these companions of the Calze. Now, there are a lot of artists who worked for them. Andrea Palladio, as I mentioned before, seems to emerge from the Vicentine. There's a Vicenza sort of group of compagnie that are related to the Venetian ones. Aretino, who composed many of his plays, Talenta, for example, and it was for Talenta's first performance that Vasari went to Venice for the only time in his life. Art historians have speculated a great deal about Vasari recently. Poor man, in the 500th year of his anniversary of his birth, he was bashed a great deal. But what people haven't gone into, strangely enough, is his relationship with Aretino in Venice. They both came from Arezzo, they're both Aretines, and there seems to have been quite a close relationship. So Vasari went to Venice really to work for Aretino for the Conpagnie delle Calze and to create architecture for these early displays. And then there's Titian, who did quite a lot as well. Now, in the context of this conference, it's perhaps interesting, and on this there's really no literature at all, to realize that some of the greatest patrons of the Italian Renaissance, as part of their education, were sent to Venice for a year or half a year to be part of one of these compagnie, to learn the art of festival decoration and festival arrangement. And we have among these people Federico da Montefeltro, and he was a member of the Accesi, and his impresa, we heard a lot earlier on from Alessandro about the importance of imprese, and he used as one of his most important imprese that of his compagnia in Venice. Alfonso d'Este spent almost a year in Venice, and in a very famous painting that I'll show you later on, the Bacchanal of the Andrians, you get representations of the Conpagnie delle Calze among the gods and goddesses. And, of course, Federico Gonzaga. Now, this is a pretty amazing collection of princes who are going to Venice, ostensibly a republican oligarchy, but to learn the art of how to create ceremony and that sort of thing. And this is the sort of patrician that they would have worked with, Ottaviano Grimani. Now, I want to look at one particular cycle of paintings, the Ursula cycle in the Accademia in Venice. And this is Carpaccio's first known work. He's virtually an undocumented artist before he does this cycle of paintings. There's a lot of literature on it, but he's sometimes treated within the history of Venetian painting as being a rather old-fashioned sort of artist. So this is a picture commissioned by the Loredan family, and you have the presumably the patrons here, although it's not entirely clear which members of the family they are. And here, the arrival of the ambassadors to ask for Ursula's hand in marriage. There are multiple texts of the Ursula legend, but not one that really precisely corresponds to what's going on. It's loosely related to the Golden Legend. It's a painting that's celebrated for its representation of luxury, of Venetian life. And these young men are quite gorgeous. But you can see the stockings, and they're not just simply divided into two colors, but later on in the cycle, they have conspicuous jewelry, and their legs are, in fact, a form of sexual display. Now, the story of Ursula is a story of a marriage, but it's a marriage that doesn't happen because Ursula is martyred along the way. But it is very much the sort of thing that you might expect these Conpagnie to be interested in. In the Return of the Ambassadors, here's a member of the Loredan family, and he has an extraordinary impresa and jewels on his stockings. There's a detail to show you this more clearly. The scene is quite clearly Venice, although like with the best Canaletto, you can't always quite tell where it is, and of course Venice has changed a little bit. Here the painting at the head of the room in the Accademia as they're now installed. They were once in a confraternity building attached to San Giovanni and Paolo. Here, right at the center, you get another representation, but here with the imprese on their sleeves. Here's a detail that shows you a little more clearly, sort of thing. And this is Momenti's reconstruction of the imprese, which still, I think, needs some explication. We might. I must say I'm taking advantage of all these wonderful Italian scholars here to ask them about a subject that I'm continually working on. Now, Giorgione's Tempesta, well-known painting to everyone, about which there is zillions and zillions of writing on, has on the side here a young man who is identified in the early sources as a soldier, or a very weird kind of soldier. Michiel, for many, many decades, who's the earliest source for Venetian painting of this period, and had an enviable reputation that whatever he said, everyone believed every word of it, is now being criticized like everyone else. And he's sometimes described as a shepherd, but that doesn't really seem to work, and he has, in fact, unusual stockings on that are different one from the other. Now, the person who commissioned the painting, we believe, because it was in his collection early on, was Gabriel Vendramine. And I'm showing also the Vendramine family portrait from the National Gallery in London, which is the only real portrait of a Venetian family that exists from this period. Portraits of families in Venice don't seem to have occurred because of the sumptuary laws and the feeling that no particular family should aggrandize themselves so much that they're represented in this way. So here you have Gabriel Vendramine, the collector, his brother Andrea, and his 7 children. And this shows you, I suppose, the masculine face of Venetian society, but it also shows you a situation in which the elder son has 7 children and the slightly younger son, Gabriel, who's the collector, has no children at all. Now, we don't know whether Gabriel belonged to one of these Compagnie delle Calze, but I think it's highly likely that he did. And in the speculation about the identity of who this figure is, one could make out a case for this being something to do with the story of a play in Venice, because these people commissioned theatre all the time, and that's what I would suggest also. This is a closer detail. The condition of the painting is not great in this area, but it's we find out more and more about it through infrared analysis as time goes on. This is an installation of an exhibition that I had the honor to be one of the 5 curators of at the National Gallery of Washington, in which we recreated a little bit the Camerino at Ferrara. Or at least we put 2 pictures side by side. This may seem a very simple thing to do, but everyone else did it differently before, and we seem to think that perhaps this was the right way. Well, this is Titian's Bacchanal of the Andrians from the Prado, and it's a picture that was commissioned by Alfonso d'Este, whom we saw earlier on. And in the background of this painting are 2 men in contemporary clothes. Although this image isn't quite good enough, they are Compagnie della Calze. Now, this is also a picture about which there is loads and loads and loads of interpretations. And Miguel Falomir, who's writing the catalogue of the Prado at the moment, is looking very carefully at the underdrawing because everyone in the field of old master paintings is fascinated by these new infrared machines in which you can look under 12 layers. And it seems to be that this is there right from the beginning and painted over slightly. But the actual conception of the painting has a lot to do with these Compagnie della Calze. So, I mean, is this a theatrical reenactment of a subject or what? Now, the language of stockings in Italy is a highly charged sexual thing. And I'm just showing a rather risque, this is a Signorelli devil from the famous cycle in Monte Oliveto. And a painting we had recently in Australia for the Carrara exhibition, which is now authoritatively attributed to Mantegna Bernardino da Siena. He has a section up here about the wickedness of young men wearing stockings. So these sorts of forms of representation of emphasizing men's stockings, jewels, imprese, is a very interesting and sort of psychological one. Who were the playwrights? We've heard a lot about Machiavelli's Prince, but Mandragola was a bestseller in Venice and performed many times every year by the Compagnie. Ruzzante was their very favorite writer. There are also anonymous plays in which there's considerable nudity. I had to write a grant application recently and for the Australian Research Council, and I was, have to ask about outcomes in Australia. And I thought, well, are these plays really performable in 21st century Australia? Because we have become a bit of a nanny state, I'm afraid, in Australia. And I don't really think that, I think our society is far too prudish to put on something like La Veneziana or some of Pietro Aretino's plays. I don't know if, do you know, Bob, if any of these plays have ever been performed by Pietro? Mandragola, see, we could cope with, but the rest, no. So this sort of is a way of judging, I suppose, the erotic nature and of these sorts of things. This is a view of the Carità, which you may know as the Gallery of the Accademia now, and it's in this piazza that many of these plays were performed. Serlio was early involved in it, and this is a composition for the Compagnie delle Calze degli Accesi in Vicenza, one of the first tiered theatres ever made. So they're looking at, through this network of confraternities, they're looking at how you create a theatrical space, which is not just about a piazza. The one that intrigues me most is Alvise Conaro's plan for the Bacino of San Marco, which was a floating theatre, which you would see from the Piazza San Marco. It sort of surprises me it hasn't been done more recently, because it's a sort of amazing opportunity in a way. And this too was done for the Compagnie delle Calze. In the literature on Palladio, certain other biographies come out, like Girolamo di Pietro Foscari, who was prior of the head of the Accesi company, and this is his representation. And note that his stockings are just different colours. They don't have diamonds or pearls or imprese or anything like that. And this is the Palazzo Foscari on the Canal Grande, and probably many, many plays were known to have been performed in this palace. So you see developing from these theatrical events a more permanent expression of theatres. We know very well Andrea Palladio's theatre in the Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza, but he did 4 or 5 earlier ones that we have very little visual record of, but I understand from Beltramini that there are young Italian students who are doing archival work who have identified a whole series of theatres that they're going to publish that lead up to the Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza. And then, of course, well, to return to an old favourite, a picture about which it's very hard to determine who the author is, and that sort of thing. And I was recently at the Louvre Museum working with Vincent de Levien, who is the most extraordinary young curator and has made his name with the Leonardo exhibition. And they have an infrared machine that goes back 12 layers. So we started to play with it, with this painting. And what's very interesting, and this is unpublished yet, but I mean, why not talk about it because it's so interesting. This seems really to be by a completely different hand to this figure here, which we think probably this is Giorgione and this is Titian. And the way, and this was something that in the early literature on the painting by Hortique, who was a curator at the Louvre early on, this was something that he argued, and he must have looked at the painting in sort of as ideal a circumstance as you can. If you go to the Louvre, it's covered with discolored varnish. It's very hard to see. It's badly hung. We had it in Washington for the exhibition for that I was involved in, and we were able to have a rather good look at it then. But we hope to go on investigating that. So, I mean, for me, working in this field, it is really extraordinarily interesting to consider what circumstances this painting may have been created. It was always thought of by the Impressionists to be just a bucolic afternoon picnic of a particular kind. And then Philip Fayle introduced this idea that the female nudes were invisible to the 2 young men who were playing music. It does seem to be a celebration of poetry in anyone's interpretation. And there is one intriguing comparison that's often made with the fabulous Titian portrait of a man in a red cap in the Frick collection that may in fact be the young lute player in the painting. He seems to have the same cap. We've heard a lot from Chiara Bus about how materials are dyed in the Renaissance, and he's wearing, I think, something in Kermesse red, I understand, which is one of the most sumptuous and extraordinary cloths that are to be had. It's an intriguing comparison to speculate about who the biography of this young man might be. So that really is my short presentation. I've been shorter rather than long, but I think it opens up a field of inquiry which is really extraordinarily interesting. We know, particularly in Venice, that right throughout, from the period of the Quattrocento with sacred representations, right until Tiepolo's time, that there is an extraordinarily rich interrelationship between theatre and art. And in this particular subject, it seems to me to be of extraordinary significance also for the history of patronage, fashion, and all those sorts of things. Thank you very much.